views and opinions expressed in this program are those of the participants and do not necessarily reflect the views of BronxNet or the program underwriters.
Good evening and welcome to the New York City Public Advocate debate on BronxNet television. In our ongoing effort to promote voter literacy, this is the 69th political debate we have presented in our 25 years on BronxNet television. It's actually the second we have hosted for citywide office. Before we begin the debate, it is my pleasure to introduce the president of Lehman College, who will offer welcoming remarks, President Jose Luis Cruz.
Good evening. Welcome to Lehman College of the City University of New York. Our next public advocate will be entrusted with a most important responsibility, ensuring that our city's policies and practices reflect our collective commitment to upholding the values of equity and social justice. A commitment that Lehman demonstrates day in and day out through the efforts of our dedicated community of teachers, learners, scholars, advocates, and activists, who have established our college as third in the nation for our role in moving large numbers of low-income students into the middle class and beyond. Our work, as is the work of our city's public advocate, is part of a larger fight to ensure that meaningful opportunities are made available to millions across America today who, because of the color of their skin, the balance of their bank account, their place of origin, who they choose to love, or the tenets of their faith, have not yet been afforded the opportunity to meet their full potential. And so it is that here at a college named for one of the leading humanitarians of his generation, we gather tonight to forward the democratic process and advance the fight for equity and social justice. I wish each candidate the best of luck, and I thank you for being with us tonight. Thank you.
BronxNet partners tonight are the League of Women Voters, a nonpartisan political organization that advocates for informed and active participation in government and works to increase understanding of major policy issues. And also by Lehman Stages, who did a great job preparing the Lovinger Theater for tonight's broadcast in front of a live audience. Tonight's program is also being simulcast on the Manhattan Neighborhood Network. BronxNet thanks them for their partnership. The election for public advocate will be held citywide on Tuesday, February 26th, and there are 17 candidates on the ballot. One of them, Latricia Walker, has withdrawn. 6 others will not be here tonight, citing schedule conflicts. They are Melissa Mark Viverito, Daniel O'Donnell, Jumani Williams, Helal Sheikh, Manny Alejandro, and Eric Ulrich, who did say he's hoping to make an appearance before the program ends. We'll see how that goes. But we are thrilled to have a huge field of candidates here with us tonight, and this is without a doubt the largest field we have hosted in our 25 years. And so in order from my left to right, it is Assemblyman Ron Kim. Thank you for joining us. Also journalist and activist Nomiki Konst. Thank you. The 2 empty seats, both Adonis Rodriguez and Michael Blake said that they are stuck in traffic, and maybe that's one of the issues we can talk about is New York City and Bronx traffic, but we expect that they will be here soon. Attorney Jared Rich, nice to have you with us, sir. Councilmember Rafael Espinal, thank you. Political activist Benjamin Yee, thank you, sir. Attorney Dawn Smalls, thank you for joining us. Political activist Anthony Herbert, nice to have you with us. And Professor David Eisenbach, thank you, sir, for joining us. Candidates, we have seated you according to a random draw. We will present questions and closing statements according to that same order. And so I guess starting with number one at the far left, and that's not necessarily a political designation, that'll be up to you to determine. But Mr. Kim, we will begin with you. Let's start by defining what this is about, and I'm sure all the candidates will want to weigh in on this. The Office of Public Advocate has been defined as the city's ombudsman. But without subpoena or legislative authority, many say it's really only a research institute. And cynics claim it serves mostly as a stepping stone to higher office, something I know you've heard about. Can you point to any successful actions of the Public Advocate's Office in the past that had real effect? And certainly, what might you do as public advocate that could have concrete impact on New Yorkers' lives?
Yeah, I think the previous public advocates, they've all had their unique twist to what that role was designed to be and how they executed it. Like, for example, Tish James was great on affordable housing, and she kept the watch list of some of the worst landlords in the city of New York, which I think we can all agree that we can continue to do. But I plan on running to make this position and this office bigger and better than before. I want to transform it to be the country's first ever dedicated public office to focus on people's private debt. This is an issue that's dragging down so many families in the city of New York, particularly in issues such as dealing with student debt. There are 1 million New Yorkers right now dealing with student debt, and I want this to be the first office ever dedicated to focus on canceling and monetizing people's personal private debt.
I do want to acknowledge Councilmember Rodriguez. Adonis Rodriguez has joined us. Thank you very much. I hope the traffic wasn't too bad, but you made it nonetheless. I'm assuming everybody wants to weigh in on that question, so we'll be happy to go around. Ms. Konst, you're next.
Thank you so much for having us. You know, when you go back to 25 years ago with our first public advocate, New York was not in a different place than it is today. It's just in a much worse place. We have the worst income inequality in the country in New York City at the worst moment in history. And what Assemblymember Kim mentions about debt is a big part of that, but also the cost of living. Wages are historically low, rents are historically high, and the Office of the Public Advocate is here to make sure that all of New York City's agencies and government and city council, and of course the mayor, are responding to every New Yorker's needs. And I think the number one need New Yorkers require right now is to be able to afford to live in their city. You have all of our council members have been taking money from the real estate developer class, who has lobbied for rezonings, who has lobbied for these high rises being sold to foreign oligarchs who aren't paying taxes, and as a result, our city has been starved of resources. The MTA, of course, is barely operational at this point. I was stuck on and had to evacuate today, as an anecdote. NYCHA is $32 billion in debt.
You know, I want to just interject for everybody, really. What does a public advocate do, and how can I mean, these issues, we all know what they are. We're going to talk about them tonight. What can a public advocate actually do, especially without having subpoena power and legislative authority?
So I'm an investigative reporter. $3.4 million would have been a beautiful budget for me as an investigative reporter. There are very unique roles of the public advocate: assessing data, understanding where the real estate developments rezonings are happening before they happen. Amazon's a perfect example, the neighborhood rezone. If the public advocate had called out those rezonings before, we may have been able to stop the deal before it didn't happen.
Councilmember Rodriguez.
The public advocacy is very important, especially for working class, poor New Yorkers. How do we get to where we are here today? We don't live in a city where the rate of unemployment went down through the whole city of New York. We have 40% of New Yorkers who are living in poverty as we're speaking today. They are the children who go to a school in underserved community that are so segregated. When someone say, I went to a public school, my grandfather went to a public school, my children's going to a public school, that's a public school. In that generation, they're all professionals. That's a public school where the PTA raised $1 million. So as a public advocate, I will give the voice to the voiceless, because the role of the public advocate is to be sure that all city agencies are accountable to provide all the services and respect that New Yorkers deserve. Who get those respect? The upper class.
Thank you
Who
very
are always
much.
behind? The working class, mainly the immigrants like myself.
Mr. Rich, yes.
See, unfortunately, this question comes up a lot because up till now, you're dealing with a public advocate position that's been filled with career politicians simply seeking to use the office to seek higher office. And what you'll find is if we put a person who's an outsider, who's beholden to no one in this position, you might have a transformation of the office. For example, the city charter says, in addition to other duties and responsibilities, the public advocate shall serve as the public advocate. And I'll take that to mean is as follows. If a woman like Jasmine Headley, who a few months ago dared to sit down on the floor of HRA, dared to sit down on the floor getting her public assistance, she went to Rikers for 5 days. Our public officials took to Twitter to say, will somebody help? When I'm public advocate and I hear about news like that, I'll be in the car on the way to Rikers Island with my phone in my hand, calling a DA and springing her out. Because the public needs a public advocate who's a member of the public to be their advocate.
Thank you very much, Mr. Espinal.
Yeah, well, I'm running on the livable city line, and my goal is to put comprehensive plans forward to make New York City a livable city for all New Yorkers. You know, as someone who grew up in East New York, a neighborhood that's been disinvested in for such a long time, you know, I understand the struggles and the pressures that folks in communities like mine go through, and I feel that more and more New Yorkers who are facing the same issues. But one of the powers that hasn't been brought up yet is the power to legislate. You have the power to introduce legislation and get it passed. Tish James has been very successful in doing that. For example, she passed a law where employers can ask potential employees their salary history, which is very important in closing the gender pay equity gap. She also passed legislation to keep track of every single capital promise the city makes in rezonings to communities. We've seen communities rezoned and big improvements like the purchase of parks and the creation of parks were not delivered on. She created a portal where now New Yorkers can see where those projects are, and that's how I want to use my power as public advocate.
Mr. Yee, go ahead.
So this is probably the most important question of this entire debate, of this entire race. The public advocate, as you mentioned, is not one of particular authority. It's not the mayor, it doesn't have executive power. Even though it can introduce legislation into the city council, it doesn't have a vote in that body, nor in any of the very important subcommittees. So what can the public advocate do? And as you also mentioned, my background is as a political activist, but it's also as somebody in civic technology. And so much of what the public advocate has been doing over the last 20, 25 years that it's been in existence is working with the bully pulpit, working on investigations, working on shining a light. And it's gotten us to where we are now. And if you want more of the same, then vote for one of the candidates that wants to do the same thing. But I am coming to this with a very different vision for what the public advocate's office can do and should be. I'm running on 3 concrete programs: Civics for All, Power for Communities, and Justice for New Yorkers, which are designed to use the public advocate's office without the need for the mayor, without the need for the city council, without the need for the governor, to run these programs which will empower New Yorkers in city decision making, using the office as a resource and an organizing tool for the thousands and thousands of people that are already trying to get involved in our system but are stymied. For the last 2 years, I've taught 4,000 people volunteer civics workshops. Hundreds and hundreds of them have gone on to be involved, build a voice for their community by running for hidden civic institutions like county committee, joining community boards, running for NYCHA tenant associations. That's what we need in a public advocate.
Thank you very much. Ms. Smalls?
So you asked the question about what can the public advocate do, and I'd like to start with litigation, which is one of the powers that has not been talked about thus far. Tish James was a graduate of Howard Law School and was very aggressive in pursuing litigation as one of the powers of the Public Advocate's Office. I have already publicly stated that I would sue NYCHA within the first 30 days. I am a partner at one of the top litigation firms in the country and would file a lawsuit to demand information about the repairs that have been submitted from NYCHA buildings, from which buildings, how quickly they're being turned around, and who's managing those requests to make sure that we get real accountability at NYCHA.
Thank you very much. Mr. Herbert?
First, thank you so much for this opportunity. I mean, we all have a concept of what we believe the office to be. But at the end of the day, quite frankly, it has to be that individual that does the oversight to ensure that the mayor and the city council are doing their job. And all those minions that they hire to work in these various agencies are responsive to the needs of the folks in our community. As a staffer who worked for an elected official on 3 different levels, I understand the dynamics of people wanting to get services. But by the time they come to an elected official's office, they're already at the end of their road. So they're looking for a way out and support. So what we have to make sure is that these individuals have access to the resources and information that will afford them to live as decent and respectable citizens of our city and not be treated as though they're just somebody folks can step on looking for their career to build down the line. So I would be an advocate strongly with making sure that the mayor and the city council do their job, and if not, we will investigate and strongly alongside the district attorney and the New York State Attorney General to get corruption out of our system.
Mr. Eisenbach, yes.
I'm a professor. I teach history, but I ran in the 2017 race for public advocate in the Democratic primary because I felt Tish James abandoned the Small Business Job Survival Act. I promised that if I was elected, I would make sure that act got its public hearing and that it got passed. I lost, but I decided to keep up the fight anyway. We made sure that we got a city council speaker who would give it a public hearing. We got a public hearing in the fall, and we are set to pass this law, the Small Business Job Survival Act, for the first time in 33 years. I know how to be a public advocate as a private citizen, and as the real public advocate of the city of New York, we can get anything done. Thank you.
Thank you very much. The next question for you, Ms. Const. I'm going to say one word, and everybody here is going to jump, and that word is Amazon. Amazon is not coming to Long Island City. While it's clearly a victory against corporate welfare, does it signal to the world that if you are a big corporation, you'd better not come to New York City? And even more immediately, this is today's daily news. Is anyone who opposed Amazon coming to New York now subject to legitimate backlash that 25,000 potential jobs and billions in tax revenues have left the city? This is a political issue that many will have to deal with. You get the first crack. I'm sure others will want to say something.
So I'm actually a resident of Long Island City, Astoria, where Amazon, very close to where Amazon was proposed to go in. My senator and my congresswoman were one of the biggest opponents to the Amazon deal that was being proposed. From day one, before day one actually, this was never just about the backroom deal that didn't have a good process. Amazon is a multinational corporation that has a history of exploiting workers. It has a history of being dishonest in its deal makings, so much so that Austin is now suing Amazon to get its incentives back because they lied. It has a history of driving up homelessness. New York City, you know, it wasn't about jobs. There were no details of these jobs. This was their candy that they were putting out there to distract away. Before the Amazon deal, there was a rezoning in that neighborhood in which high-rises were built and sold to Amazon employees before there was any word uttered about the Amazon deal. So this is why, as public advocate, it is essential that there is somebody who knows how to investigate, understand data, and call attention to it before the wind blows in another direction when it's politically opportunistic.
Will there be political fallout for Democrats and others as a result of this?
I think
You can
the
do it in
political
a
fallout.
word so we don't take a lot of
Sure,
time.
I think it's coming from one person who's sitting in the governor's mansion, and he's using the media as a weapon against his political enemies. And just to make note, I've been the only person who's consistently called to kill this deal.
Okay, others?
I'm
sure everybody does.
I
Mr.
tend to want to
Herbert,
say,
then Mr. Yee, and then Mr. Rich. I'm sure everybody has something to say. Go ahead.
albeit the community should have been in the negotiations in the very beginning, I think very much so that there is a problem now. The problem is, who's to say that those jobs weren't going to come into existence? I know that there's been some pushback from a lot of the tenant association presidents who live in the actual immediate area, who had been promised jobs, who had been put in a position to be placed in opportunities for training. So at the end of the day, what I want to say to all of those that was in opposition, where are the 25,000 jobs, opportunities with regards to the small businesses in the area? What do you have now planned since you guys have killed this deal?
There's absolutely no correlation with corporate subsidies and the jobs and revenue growth. Every economist for the last 10 years came out and said that to perpetuate the narrative, exactly what corporate politicians want to do. They want to scare the public with words like jobs, growth, revenue, while they justify the giveaway of billions of dollars that have absolutely no impact. That money should be invested directly back into our local economies. This is an opportunity to not only stop here, but bust up monopolies like Amazon for good and end corporate welfare once and for all.
Okay, so Mr. Rich, you got it.
Yee.
I'm sorry, Mr. Yee, and then Mr. Rich. I'm sorry.
No problem. Ultimately, what the killing of this deal signals is that backroom deals won't be accepted by the people of New York. And this is a fantastic thing. Can you imagine what would have happened if New Yorkers had just rolled over and the mayor and governor and richest company on the face of the planet could just get together and decide what happens to a community in New York City, this would have been a disaster. It would have said to our elected officials and to the richest among us that the voters don't really need to be considered when we're doing city planning, and that cannot happen. Ultimately, the question of where the jobs come from, New York City is not the Rust Belt. It is not a place that is hurting for jobs. We are outperforming. We are set to grow over the next 50 years. Every other tech giant is here and paying their fair share of taxes, or full share of taxes. I wouldn't say fair just yet, but their full share of taxes.
Okay,
I think it
Mr.
perfectly
Rich and then
illustrates.
Mr. Rodriguez, and then we'll move on.
It's a perfect illustration of an epic failure in government where we had personality conflicts get in the way of negotiating in good faith a deal that would be reasonable for everybody. And we don't have any reason anymore in the government. And if Jeff Bezos or Amazon is watching, I'd like to say that in 10 days from now, we could have a voice of reason, and you've put a lot of time and effort into this project, and I'd like to get you back to the negotiating table, because there could be a deal that's beneficial for everybody. This is the ripple effects from this deal falling apart are going to be felt in New York City for a long time, and we really need to reconsider what happens here.
Mr. Rodriguez, go ahead.
The deal, as it was announced, it was bad for the city of New York. It could be good for the 1%. It could be good for the richest individual who control the tech company. That last year they had to bring 98,000 individuals from other countries because we are not training, we have not built a pipeline where black, Latinos, and women have been trained to work in the tech field. Announcing 25 jobs of people coming from other places, not guaranteed that at least 50% of the job will be from New Yorkers. Announcing that how some will be training and not working with CUNY when City College had to spend $15,000 to graduate one engineering, 3 times double, 3 times more than the average students. So if we want to take our city to be in the front when it comes to technology, we have to be more transparent and we have to include everyone. This is not the politician who killed this deal. This is New Yorkers who say enough is enough.
Okay, back with you for the New York City debate for public advocate on BronxTalk Television. We see that Michael Blake has joined us. Nice to have you with us, sir. The next question for you, Mr. Rodriguez. Earlier this week, in a resounding 45-1 vote with 3 abstentions, the City Council voted to disband the For-Hire Vehicles Committee that was chaired by Councilman Reverend Ruben Diaz Sr. because of remarks he made claiming that the City Council is controlled by the homosexual community. If you would, sir, talk about your decision to abstain and also really on a larger scale about the state of equality and fairness in New York City. Where does racism and bigotry still exist? How does it affect New Yorkers? And is correcting it a matter of legislation, enforcement, or something else?
Look, I just believe that we have made a lot of progress as a city. However, there's a lot more that we have to do. In this decision that was made, one thing that I was clear is I don't agree with, Ruben Diaz's statement in his position, the LGBTQ community. However, he also is a council member inside the poorest congressional district in the whole nation. And he being a voice fighting for taxi drivers. He being a voice fighting for working class. So that's why yesterday there was more than 1,000 individuals together with him. I'm showing their support, and I don't think that people who believe, in my case, who abstain for voting to remove him from that committee first, because that committee came back to the committee that I chair, the Committee of Transportation. But second, because I believe that even though I do not agree on his position on the LGBTQ community, I do respect the work that he has done advocating for working class, especially Latino, that in the city of New York, from 10,000 people that we have in leadership, only 200 are Latinos.
Okay, and what about the larger question about equality and race in the city of New York? I mean,
We need to address the reality. Like in this process, I've been able to meet with individuals from Nigeria, from the Bengali, from the Bangladesh community. What we have seen is, no, we don't have a melting pot city. We're living everyone in their own corner. And we believe that by celebrating Cinco de Mayo with a tequila margarita, with the salsa and merengue, that's how we respect and value culture. There's a lot more that we gotta do to recognize that every single ethnic group made a contribution. And those that came, especially the 38% New Yorkers, like myself, born and raised in another country, the last group of immigrants, know our rights are not respected, and race still play a role in our society.
okay, others? Mr. Eisenbach first, and we'll go, everybody's going to have something to say. I'm
Adonis,
sure.
I was very disappointed that you abstained and that you did not vote to take away this committee chairmanship. It's important for all of us, elected officials and otherwise, to stand up to hatred and to prejudice and to claims that he made were just absolutely wrong. And it's not an excuse to just sort of stand back and say, well, I abstained because he did some good in other areas. He was wrong. He should have had his committee chairmanship unanimously taken away.
Thank you very much. Go ahead, Mr. Yee.
So very recently, we have seen vicious hate attacks in this city. The city is not doing enough to prevent things like this or to take equality and hatred seriously. We had 3 people murdered in a Chinese restaurant by somebody who was there to kill Chinese people or Asians. We had attacks on the Jewish community in Crown Heights not long ago. Now, my father's family came here from China. My mother's family came here from Poland. Her parents were Jews who survived the Holocaust. The only reason somebody like me exists is because of places like New York. They got married in 1977. Before that, 10 years before that, interracial marriage like theirs, illegal in over half of this country. This city needs to stand up and take a serious, serious look at itself and ensure that our government fights hatred and that the other elected leaders in this city do not allow people to skate by. That includes people who are in the city council. Ruben Diaz Sr. has been preaching bigotry for years, decades from the state senate. He went to the city council. This is absolutely unacceptable. We need every elected official in this borough to pledge that they will support somebody else when he is up for re-election, and I think he should be ejected from the Democratic Party.
Thank you. Mr. Rich first, Ms. Smalls, and then Mr. Blake.
I just want to be clear. Ruben Diaz Sr. has a long history of being a bigot. This was not an isolated incident. And we have a lot of qualified people that are not part of government and are ready to be in the government. And we don't need these old people who have old ways stuck in our government. We have a city council that's refusing to come down hard enough. He should have been forced to resign yesterday. We don't have a place for this in New York City. And we have a lot of people to replace all these people.
Ms. Smalls, and I'd like to address also the larger question about how we're going to deal with this in New York. Go ahead.
Yeah, I was just going to say that we are living in the age of Trump. We have no room for shading of the issues. If somebody is a bigot, if somebody is racist, we absolutely have no room for them in our city, and we have no room for them in our party. It is absolutely unacceptable, particularly for a Democrat, to say the things that he said as a leader of other Democrats and other New York City residents.
Okay, Mr. Blake?
Well, we just got to be honest. Adonis is not calling him out because he endorsed his campaign, right? Like, it was, like, let's be honest, homophobic comments were made that are unacceptable, plain and simple. We just got to call that out for what it is. And so the premise of being silent on this is absolutely ridiculous. The LGBT community needs to know you're going to stand up for them. Now, look, I'm here in the Bronx. When we think about what's happening here, there were moments before where some of us stood by and saw inappropriate comments, and I said, look, you can't allow it to be silent any longer. And so, to your broader question, we have to move forward now. There's an opportunity where City Council has to push further. I do agree with Jared. You have to go further because it can't just stop with a committee chairmanship. If you allow someone to keep their seat, that's one of the reasons why I said that he should resign, you're allowing for bad behavior to continue.
Mr. Rodriguez, I'll give you a chance to respond since he
mentioned it
directly. Then Ms. Constant, and I guess everybody's also going to want to respond.
Assembly member here,
he
gave a donation to Ruben Diaz of $2,000, and later on, because of the pressure, he took the money back.
So that's just factually inaccurate, so let's make sure to tell the story right now.
He has a story also working with Ruben Diaz,
yes,
as many individuals here. He's not new, what people have been saying.
And what
he's been here in this city a lot of elected officials been going to his borough asking for his support, including people who was here too.
So here's the
So
difference
for me,
about-
the most important thing that we need to do is to be clear. We need to stand for the LGBTQ community all the way, based on my legislation and initiative I have been. When it comes to recognizing the work that he's been doing, supporting the taxi drivers, yes, he being a supporter of that community when many of them being committed suicide.
So
Not
let's be clear
everybody
about
here
this.
has
And then we're gonna
supported
move on.
Ruben
Go ahead.
Diaz.
So let's be
I
clear
think
about
that's
this.
an important distinction.
Right. Let's
I
be
campaigned against him several times, in
So,
fact.
so let's be clear on the facts, since Adonis wants to muddle the truth right here. So, inappropriate behavior was conveyed. I demanded a refund immediately. What Adonis is saying to you right now is, because of support that he's getting, I can't speak out further.
That's your word.
No, I mean, that's literally you're saying. You're saying because of the work he's doing with taxi drivers,
Because
you're
of
not
the recognition and job that he do every day, representing the poorest congressional districts, and you
That
are
does not
vice
make
chairman of the
That does not make
DNC.
it acceptable, Adonis. He had homophobic comments. He said that the city council is being controlled. And you're essentially saying right here, you're not going to speak up about it because of what he's done for other
He's
communities. That's
speaking about it
ridiculous.
every
Okay.
day.
The
Ms.
governor of
Collins?
Virginia
Hang
is
on.
supposed to do
My-
real good
my-
things too.
Ms.
He was
Collins,
in blackface.
go ahead.
Politicians are going to politician. No, but for real, politicians are going to politician. Reverend Diaz has been in office for decades. He has been saying homophobic comments for decades. Nobody should have taken a donation check from him a few years ago or now. That is the problem with this race. The public advocate is supposed to catch things early and call them out early. I was the first person on the stage to call for him to resign, and then it was Senator
That's not
Gustavo
true.
Rivera. Yes, it
I've
was
done
on the
it
record,
a lot
city and state, city
over
and state.
years, over years and years of being involved.
I investigated the
So,
Bronx
go ahead.
machine as an investigative reporter.
I
you taught
have fought
civics
against the
classes.
Bronx machine on the ground.
Okay.
We have so many issues to talk about
but,
here. I think we could
you
all
had
agree
your
that
time,
Ruben
you
Diaz
had
is a
your
bigot,
time. There are
and
two
the city
women on
council
stage.
should make him resign.
Okay, we have to have a
Finish
moment
your
here,
statement. You
because
wanted to say something, and then we'll move on.
The reality is that the public advocate's office needs to be independent of political interests and special interests. Otherwise, we get into these situations where nobody wants to call out Amazon till it's popular. Nobody wants to call out for an investigation of NYCHA until it's popular. You need to catch these things early and call them
Thank
out
you.
early.
Mr. Kim,
I think-
final
I think-
word, and
I
then we'll
think,
move on.
Except for maybe one or two people, I think we can all agree that he should resign, yes?
Yes.
Yes.
Okay, maybe a couple of people, but to your point, the divisiveness, the hatred, the violence that I've seen last 6 years as a lawmaker, it's gotten worse every single day. The hate crime, the language, and the root of all that is, to me, economic justice. We need economic justice to get to the bottom of this. When you leave one piece of pie for all these communities to compete for, and you're pitting black, Hispanics, Asians, immigrants, women against each other, it's gonna get ugly. You don't know how many times I walk down the street and people are just calling me names and telling me to go back to my country for no apparent reason. Every single day, this type of stuff happens, but it's not because necessarily they're born with hate, but they're just so frustrated for the lack of opportunities when mega corporations are extracting every single day dollars from our communities. We stopped Amazon, but we're not done yet.
Thank you very much.
I would like to talk
That's
about
right.
concrete things the public advocate can do about this, though.
You know what? When we
Ben,
come around
civics
again,
classes aren't going to solve the NYCHA problem.
okay,
got more
let's
plans.
really. I'd like to talk about some of the brick and mortar. Mr. Blake, the next question is for you, and let's talk about brick and mortar a little bit. As you well know, the city's, you're a Bronx elected official, the city's proposed Jerome Avenue rezoning was not universally supported by many in that local area, with gentrification and commercial displacement at the top of the concerns. Using what happened at Willets Point as an example, all those businesses were promised to be relocated to a place in Hunts Point, and when that fell through, many lost out big time. The next Bronx rezoning appears to be targeted for Southern Boulevard. So the question is twofold. Are the rezonings the best way to rebuild struggling communities? And on a larger scale, can we develop the city's poorer communities so that people who live here can afford to stay here?
So the first question is absolutely not. It's not the best approach, and several have said this. For any of the current or former city council members running, that they should be disqualified because of what happened when it comes to zoning. Because zoning and rezoning is the reason why you have gentrification and communities being pushed out across our city. That's just a clear fact on that. Take it a step further. There are many ways you can have better economic incentives to actually help communities. When you think about we should rescind tax credits for landlords that are not implementing rent stabilization, rather put in tax credits so that people can actually hire people from the communities. There are better ways to take that approach. One of the things we did here in the Bronx is an effort called Project Destin. It allows for entities and young people to be trained around housing so that they become landlords themselves to understand affordable housing options rather than mega options. So there's ways to do this better. You can find that approach. But when we think about the policies, this is one of the clear differences. You have to ask yourself, for the current and former city council members, how are you now talking about making things easier when you took votes that allowed for gentrification to happen in the first place?
Thank you very much. Mr. Eisenbach?
Yes. My campaign is the Stop Rebney campaign, because the Real Estate Board of New York has, through pay-to-play corruption, corrupted our city council. We've had the rezoning of affordable neighborhoods like Inland, like East Harlem, like East New York and Jerome Avenue, and they've made affordable neighborhoods unaffordable. As soon as you put in a luxury tower with $1 million apartments in it, I don't care how much you have a set aside on affordable, all the surrounding landlords start to jack up their rents, and that creates record displacement. The Bronx is leading the city, according to the City Council Speaker's report, on evictions. According to the Regional Planning Commission, 70% of Bronx residents are in danger of displacement. This is a crisis that is made by a corrupted city council, by the Real Estate Board of New York, and we need a public advocate who will stand up to both.
Mr. Espinal?
Yeah, I truly don't believe that rezonings is the silver bullet to dealing with inequities in the city. The reality is the city does not prioritize making real investments into these communities. You know, we talk about rebuilding schools, making sure every school has the resources they need, making sure communities are safe, making sure that there is enough resources for communities to tap into, whether it be the creation of new jobs. Those are the conversations that we should be having, and as public advocate, that's what I was pushed for. And I know Michael Blake likes to say that anyone who voted for rezoning should be disqualified, but he had an opportunity to show where he stands on big development deals when he decided to sign a letter to invite Amazon into our city.
So since
I'll let you
Raphael
respond,
wants
and
to
then we'll
jump
go
in,
around
I'm
the
happy
room.
to
We'll
dive
go
in on
down the
that.
line. Go ahead. Did you want to say something?
Well, I mean, it's really convenient that Raphael now wants to talk about these things. So at the end of the day, why did I decide to step up when it came to Amazon? I signed the original letter and said very clearly that the current deal was a bad deal. Now, why did I do that? Queens and the Bronx overwhelmingly wanted to see this happen because for generations they have not seen opportunities when it comes to job creation. We should have focused on making sure that women and people of color got the contracts. We should focus on local hiring. We should focus on UN opportunities. It is real easy to speak after the fact about why many of us jumped on board on this, but it's about helping communities of color that didn't get help before.
Okay,
I would just question anyone who makes one decision that does a complete 180 when the time comes.
Well, you ran on the conservative line, and now you're running
Hang
as a
on,
progressive, so that's
let's-
ironic that you're saying
let's
that.
let
That could
you,
work in Brooklyn, Raphael.
So in response to what Councilman Espinal says, it's the amount of irony and is outrageous. Councilman Espinal rezoned his neighborhood. Councilman Espinal ran on the conservative line, which is a bigoted line.
And you ran for
Councilman
Congress
Espinal,
in
I had my-
Tucson,
you had your
Arizona.
time.
You ran for Congress in
you
Tucson, Arizona. Now you're running for
I'm from
public
Buffalo,
advocate in
New
New York
York.
City.
Oh, that's
You ran
great.
for
I've
Congress
lived here
in
for-
Tucson, Arizona, and
Can
now
you
you're
say
here.
the word right?
Yeah,
So
sorry,
New
I'm
York
from New
is a-
York. I'm sorry, I'm from New York.
Let's not talk
Raphael,
about zoning.
Mr. Conservative, because the conservative
okay,
line you ran
okay.
on. Hang on a second. So Councilman Espinal, who rezoned his
Let's try
neighborhood,
not to talk over each
thank
other.
you.
Go ahead.
Worked for Senator Martin DeLon, traded seats.
I never worked for Senator Martin
worked
DeLon. Get
with-
your facts straight. If you're an investigative supporter, I would think you know who I worked for.
You worked with Senator Martin DeLon, accepted more real estate developer money than any other councilman in Brooklyn, was in line with
Really?
Brooklyn real
Really?
estate developer
Really?
monies.
Okay.
Money.
That-
I will.
it's not.
Can I
You're
continue?
Can we
throwing
talk about
Councilman
alternative facts.
Espinal, do you
You're
want me to
throwing
really go to
alternative
investigative
facts.
reporting?
You are throwing alternative facts out
you
there.
want
You know
alternative
what?
facts?
We should look into your donations as well, because I can
Let's-
find some very colorful
let-
ones
let
in
him
there as
finish
well.
the
Okay.
sentence, and I will give you an
Interesting.
opportunity to
Interesting.
respond.
That is a threat. Just want to
Finish
put that on the
your
It's not a
record.
threat. I'm just saying.
Listen, everybody's had their time. Can I have my time, Councilman? You have time on the
you're
floor.
name dropping.
Are you going to keep speaking over me, Councilman?
No, I'm not.
Are you going to
But
keep
if
speaking
you
over me? You
bring
will
my
have your
name
time
up-
to respond.
Mr. Espinal,
Councilman,
let her
Councilman,
answer question.
Councilman,
I'm answering your
civility, a
question.
livable city. This is not very livable stage here.
Just
So,
finish your statement, and I'll give you a
as I
chance
was
to
saying,
respond.
when city council members partner up with these big developers, as every city council member in this race has done, as every city council member who has rezoned their neighborhoods, it does make the city unlivable. What it does is it drives long-term residents out of their communities. It illegally evicts members of communities who've lived there forever. It truly does, as David says, make a city unaffordable. And at the end of the day, a public advocate should not be a partner with big developers. A public advocate should be willing to investigate these developers who have starved our city of almost $100 trillion in the last 35 years
Got
that
it.
could have gone to the MTA.
We'll give you a chance to, did you want to say anything further?
Yeah, I think it's easy for anyone to criticize what happened in East New York when they never stepped foot into the community. This is a
not
community
true
that
at
needs,
all.
that needs real affordable
My
housing.
mentor was from
Well,
East New
please,
York.
let's let him
talking
have the
over me? Are
opportunity.
you talking over me? This is a community that was starved of affordable housing because most of it is market rate housing. The affordable housing in my community that's being built is going to be between people making between $15,000 a year and $70,000 a year, and we have 4,000 jobs coming into the manufacturing area. So this is a real plan for the people.
I just
Mr.
want to be the
Rich.
voice of reason here for a minute.
That's
and
his
bring it
paid
back
for
down.
audience there, just so everybody
You
knows
know,
he's a consultant.
We're talking about the Small Business Job Survival Act. I want to talk about how we could use zoning creatively when we have new people in government. The Small Business Job Survival Act is an act that's going to give automatic renewals to commercial tenants. I'm a practicing housing court lawyer. I know more about housing court law and practicing law in New York City than any candidate, and I want to explain to everybody why this is a bad idea and what a good idea is for government to do using zoning. One way that you get a tenant out is with an expired lease. This is going to be held up constitutionally. If it gets through, you're going to find landlords, commercial landlords make their leases very onerous. They're very landlord friendly, and the landlords are going to find defaults in a lease, and they're going to get tenants out anyway. And the point is this: if we use zoning to help instead of hurt, we can do as follows. We have laws that say there can only be so many bars per block. We can have laws that say there can only be so many banks per block, only so many chain restaurants, chain stores. And what you'll find then is that those tenants can't go into the space, so the landlords will start acting differently because they won't be waiting for those tenants to come into the space. That's a solution. That's creativity, and that's what you'll get with new government.
Mr. Herbert, go ahead.
You know, I want to.
And then you'll have the final word, and we'll move on. Go ahead.
It's kind of hard to think of.
Or you didn't get to speak on this?
I didn't want to jump in because I've already been called angry, so I don't want nobody to think I'm angry. I'm just a frustrated New Yorker. First and foremost, it is very clear, as a former staff who worked for a city council person in East New York, as well as for a congressman in East New York, and understanding the dynamics of that area, I live right next door to it, there is some serious concern with regards to the rezoning. There's a threat where there will be about 50,000 people who will be pushed out because of the rezoning efforts. Couple that with the thought process that the mayor pushed through and passed the community board and said, clearly, you don't matter, I'm gonna do what I wanna do. And I gotta say honestly, Raphael Espinal had to accommodate that in order to say that he supports that. And if that's not true, then let's go back and let's figure this out so that we don't lose a lot of the black and Hispanics that live in our community. Because that's ridiculous, that what this mayor and you have done.
I would say look at the numbers. And the community board did vote no, but there were conditions on what they wanted to see, and we met those conditions.
Okay, Mr. Rodriguez, and then Mr. Yee will have the final word.
It is interesting to be like me, 40 years without a stop in all fight. And look at my colleague here and say, where were you 20 years ago, 30 years ago? Why you have your district that has so high a number of students living in shelters? What have you done to fight against poverty? When it comes to reality in communities such as mine, living with Alma, Pinnacle, Vantage, being there for 50 years and less than 1,000 apartments affordable being built. When some of the people go out from the other place in here, criticizes, but not thinking about how can we make what I did, what I make in the memorandum of understanding. For the first time in the city, the language say, if a developer builds commercial space with public dollars, a percentage of commercial space should be affordable. I thank David and my colleague for supporting the Small Business Job Survival Act, but I'm the prime of that bill. I'm the one that got that hearing, and I'm the one, not only as a council member, but as a public advocate that will be voting that bill.
Mr. Yee gets a final word, and then we'll move on. Go ahead.
Thanks. First, just for the folks at home, I believe it was Eric Delon, for which Councilman Espinal worked for. He and Martin Delon are closely politically aligned, but they're different people. The second thing I want to say is to address your question directly about zoning and rezoning. If you talk to any urban planner, they will tell you that zoning is not a plan. Planning is a plan, zoning is a tool. And what we don't have in this city right now is any sort of a plan. We have politicians coming in and zoning and rezoning for the benefit of their backers with no plan for New Yorkers. And that is why programs, as I'm proposing, like Power for Communities, to bring stakeholders in those communities together for proactive, sustained, bottom-up city planning are so important. Now, I can't go into the details here. It's a big plan, but check it out, benjaminyee.com. And the last thing I want to say is that programs like Civics for All, there are so many parts of the land use process that people don't know about. ULURP, what the borough presidents do, what the city council's powers are, they don't even know. And we have seen what happens when people get engaged. They have flipped the state senate, they have killed Amazon, they have flipped Congress. Anybody who gets up here and says civics doesn't help people and we shouldn't bother trying to get that knowledge in people's hands should be viewed with some suspicion.
I didn't say that. I said it wouldn't solve the NYCHA crisis, because that's the answer you gave.
Let's move on. Mr. Rich, it's been widely publicized that the HUD regional director is spending this month living in public housing. She started out in the Bronx, as a matter of fact, to get a firsthand look at the myriad of issues that plague NYCHA. Do you expect the federal government's involvement to be significant in improving conditions in public housing? The mayor recently appointed Catherine Garcia as interim chair at NYCHA. A thankless job for her. I guess we all have sympathy for what she's going to have to go through. But how can a public advocate help these terrible conditions that people are living under?
See, NYCHA's an issue that's not a new issue. Housing doesn't just fall apart. Boilers don't all just break out once. And what you have here are a lot of politicians asking for your forgiveness on a building maintenance issue. And as public advocate, what I'm going to do is use the bully pulpit, go into NYCHA, and use a flashlight and expose where the money has gone. Why are the conditions not being repaired? It's not a complex issue. It seems complex, but it's a simple issue. It's building management. All over the world, you see buildings that operate without lead paint, they're not falling down. And here in New York City, somehow all the money's missing. You need people from outside the government to figure out what's going on.
Thank you. Well, everybody's going to want to say something, I'm sure. So, Mr. Blake, we'll start with you, and we'll go down here, and then we'll give all you folks a chance. Go ahead. But please be brief, because time is of the essence.
Absolutely. So Jared is oversimplifying this. We're talking about, yes, it's decades of what's going on, but let's break this down even further. Why do people still not have heat and hot water?
Because all the boilers are broken.
And fundamentally, so you talk about it being a complex issue, it's a 30
No, because boilers break all over the place.
Please,
let's
let him finish his statement.
I mean, it's nice to yell, but there's others who have facts. So there's $30 billion in terms of the capital budget problem for this. And we talk about what we've done, $250 million that we put in last year to start this process because the boiler problems are graded 5 through 1. It's one of the reasons why on September 26th, myself and also Tony testified to Judge Pauly. Now, let's take it a step further. To the council members, when we think about lead, where the studies have now come out that the number of apartments with children under 6 is 5,800 apartments that had lead. Did you actually learn and investigate if there was lead paint in their homes? What did you do? Or on the worst scenario, did you do nothing? And so when we think about the scenarios when it comes to NYCHA, the federal monitor was necessary because NYCHA management wasn't doing what they need to do. Many people need to go to jail at NYCHA because it's unacceptable what's happening. Then you take it a step further, it's about how to make sure that you don't have a party planner in Lynn Patton showing up for just photo ops as opposed to getting the heat and the hot water and Section 3 and the regulations actually enforced. That's how you turn NYCHA around.
Mr. Rodriguez, we're going to go this way, and then we'll start here, or start here and go back in. Everybody will get to speak. Is there anybody who doesn't want to talk about NYCHA? Go ahead.
We have to talk because we are all responsible for NYCHA. Because we all been walking in front of NYCHA, and we know what's been going on. And no one has been speaking for decades about NYCHA. The private, the media, the academic sector, been seeing how the elevator been broken. I did my survey in 2009 in a NYCHA apartment my father was spending his last day. This week, my mother still living in the diamond houses. This week, two of the buildings in the diamond houses, they went without elevator for hours. So I know what's happening. The poorest New Yorker, the black and Latino and the Asian, and those coming from the former Soviet Union are the one putting in those NYCHA complex. The wealthy, they don't care about NYCHA. It is time for us to bring more resources, but also it is time for us to say, let's all join a class action lawsuit to be sure that what the former speaker did, that removed the responsibility for the profession of being the one to remove lead paints from NYCHA. And let's provide tenant legal representation to all NYCHA tenants. That's how we can that's how we will be bringing NYCHA apartment to be more decent to everyone.
Ms. Const.
So I've done a lot of reporting specifically on lead paint or lead crisis in NYCHA, and I was working in Flint with the lead water crisis. And what often happens in these cases really just comes down to old-fashioned corruption. NYCHA was having closed-door meetings, which is against the law. In these meetings with political appointees, there were law firms hired from outside the city to specifically cover up lawsuits of discrimination and lead paint. In my reporting, it's outrageous that there were residents of NYCHA who had multiple jobs, who are paying over $1,500 a month in rent, who had holes in their walls that they had put in complaints for 6, 8, 10 months in advance, but because the slips weren't filed properly, they couldn't get those holes in the walls fixed. And that's where the paint had chipped off, and their babies ate the paint. There are now 18-year-olds, 19-year-olds, 20-year-olds who cannot retroactively sue the government for what is ended up being a debilitating, towards their career, towards their livelihood, because they had been poisoned by lead paint. That's just specific to lead paint.
What's the solution?
So the solution, first off, is I would be auditing NYCHA, number one. I would audit NYCHA. I would call for the transcripts of all the meetings to be put forward. And, frankly, this is a mismanagement issue. It's $32 billion in debt, but there's also a major crisis when it comes to the investigators. The investigators investigating the lead crisis were people that were not qualified to do so. And there are multiple class action lawsuits right now. Corey Stern, who's endorsed our campaign, is a lawyer representing many of the victims who've been on the front page of the papers. This is something that goes beyond the courts, and frankly, it's a human rights crisis.
All right, let's hear solutions. We all know what the problems are. We can all describe.
I think we all agree. I agree with the problems and everything that my colleagues have identified with NYCHA. And I just want to add, anything that ends with the word authority, whether it's the MTA or NYCHA, these quasi-government agencies, we've actually strategically, by design, set them up to fail. We need to be honest about that. Like we're just years away from trying to privatize everything. We already privatized higher education.
So you're advocating for a restructuring?
We need to restructure from the bottom up. We need transparency. We need the funds, but it's also about revenue. Where are we going to get this revenue? I know a bunch of my colleagues and I have different solutions to get the revenue stream, but again, for me, it's about ending the endless corporate welfare. $10 billion a year we give away to multinationals every single year. Every cent should be going back to anything that ends with an authority.
And we'll start here, Mr. Eisenbach.
The solution is a full independent audit of NYCHA. Look into the private contractors. I guarantee you will find billions of dollars that have been diverted through waste, fraud, and corruption. And secondly, we need to understand that the lead poisoning scandal was a cover-up, and it came right down from the mayor on down. I want to know, what did the mayor know, and when did he know it? And if he oversaw the poisoning of our children and then proceeded to cover it up and lie about it, he should be prosecuted.
Mr. Herbert.
I would first eliminate the entire NYCHA board, first and foremost, and appoint somebody that's more responsible to the community. Because again, our community residents are not being informed as to what's going on. Our resident association presidents are the last to be told anything that's happening, particularly with the developments in which they live. Culminate that with the thought process. I serve as the citywide civic engagement chair for the NYCHA NAACP. And I've been talking about the issues in NYCHA for the last 15 years. And I'm happy to say that all of a sudden now, everybody knows about NYCHA because it's in the news. Now that they know about it, the city council has totally failed the residents of public housing, i.e. all those that also deal with Section 8. So at the end of the day, we have to monetize those individuals and say to them, look, do your job or be removed, i.e. those heads of these committees that are not doing their job. And I think if we're talking about removing people from committees, the Public Housing Committee chair should be removed as well.
Ms. Smalls.
So I think it's important in all of these discussions to actually ground it in what the public advocate can actually do. The public advocate cannot eliminate the NYCHA board. The public advocate cannot launch a class action lawsuit. The public advocate is not part of the class. I know that because I'm an attorney, and I successfully represented one of the largest class actions.
I beg to differ.
Beg to differ what? You can't eliminate the NYCHA board.
You can push legislation to eliminate.
But the point being,
so says the person that just learned about Section 3.
As a broad basis, there's a lot of discussion about broad-based policy goals that have no grounding in what this office actually does. I have said, after doing research about the lawsuits that have actually been successfully moved forward in the public advocate's office, that the lawsuits that are allowed to proceed are the ones that are demanding information, which is part of the public advocate's core function. I would initiate a lawsuit within the first 30 days to demand information about these repairs, how quickly they're being turned around, who's managing them, and what buildings they're coming out of. That's something I can actually do as public advocate.
don't need a law for that.
Can I respond
FOIA.
first?
You got to be quick. We want
And I'll be real quick about it, and I keep saying this in this whole entire time frame. In the charter, it does not say you need to be an attorney to understand this job. It's common sense. And again, the next time somebody tells me that you need to be an attorney, I'm going to recommend the fact that all of those that are being arrested in Albany are those attorneys. So let's be clear about who's corrupt.
Mr. Yee, then Mr. Espinal, and then we'll move on. Go ahead.
So the big problem with NYCHA is that there's no accountability. The government is their landlord, the government is unresponsive, it is a disaster because the politicians don't care what's happening. The reason you have a sustained problem with disinvestment and a $30 billion capital arrears is because nobody's been paying attention to this for a long time except for the NYCHA tenants. That is why programs from the Public Advocate's Office that can actually build political power for New Yorkers are so important. I've been in civic technology and the open data community for a decade. I learned pretty quickly after 2 or 3 years that just making data and information available doesn't move things. You need to do the on-the-ground work to organize and build the political will and to empower folks. Now, the NYCHA residents have regulations and codes in the NYCHA rules that mandate that the government make decisions with the NYCHA tenant associations. Now, again, to the Civics for All thing, I teach civics all around the city. People who have taken that have stood up and said, I'm running for NYCHA tenant board at the meetings. And that is why it's so important that we empower people and then use the role of public advocate to enforce the fact that the government is supposed to listen to the tenants.
Mr. Espinal, you get the final word, and then we're going to have one quick question. Go ahead.
So we have to do two things. First and foremost, NYCHA residents cannot call 311 to get their problems fixed. And what happens is there's an internal system that's designed to hide what the problems are within NYCHA so the rest of the public cannot see. And there's a lack of transparency. My office, I would have a division dedicated to allow NYCHA residents to report their problems to my office so that we can keep track of what's happening where those repairs get done. Two, we have to tax Wall Street. Wall Street every single year gets 100% rebate from the city and state of New York. That rebate is about $11 billion that could be reinvested into NYCHA and fix those problems in a couple of years.
Thank you very much. This question for you, Mr. Espinal. We're going to do it quickly. We got about 5 minutes left before we do closing statements. Let's just talk about the opioid crisis. Certainly in the South Bronx, it's running amok. The mayor put needle drop boxes in parks, and recently a study found that thousands of needles are not in those boxes. They're all over the parks, and they become a danger to everybody. So do you support the concept of needle drop boxes? Can it work? And needle exchanges? And how do you balance that, of course, with the danger that it seems to be creating for the larger community towards solving this very difficult problem?
100% I support those boxes. If there's an issue with folks not putting the needles into the box, it's probably because there's a lack of education from the city, informing folks that those boxes exist. There are some communities with those boxes received 100% of the needles, and there were no needles in the parks. So it does work. Two, we have to make sure that there is more investments from our city to help people who have these addictions and get them out and help them get the services they need and deserve.
Okay, others? Mr. Rich, go ahead.
It's a shame that we have to have boxes with syringes, and it's really a Band-Aid for a larger systemic issue, which I focus on if you check my website, jarrydrich.nyc. We have manufacturers that are manufacturing this many pills, knowing it's for this many people, yet they continue to manufacture this many pills. And as public advocate, one of the roles is to serve as public advocate, and I will be focusing a light on the manufacturers, the drug chains, and the bad doctors, because these drugs are destroying our communities, they're killing our families, and enough is enough.
Other people, Mr. Kim?
Yeah, I mean, two years ago, I was knocking on doors in my neighborhood around Kissena Boulevard, Kissena Park, and there were literally 2 households, about 3 houses apart, where both of them lost their sons to the opioid crisis over addiction problems at 25, 27-year-old young men. This is a problem that is spread out around the entire city of New York, and I've seen it firsthand. And I agree with what we're trying to do and put some immediate aid on the ground, but you have to think also long term. You know, what's driving some of these addiction problems? The consumer-driven advertisement that have targeted, you should call them out, making sure those ads don't target people the way they do. And secondly, the doctors have been very friendly. toward overprescribing. We've had a very consumer-driven hospitals where people, whenever they complain, they're getting whatever they want. That we need to have some honest conversations with hospitals and doctors moving forward.
Mr. Rodriguez?
Yeah. Look, in my community, we have one of those needle exchange programs. The concern and frustration among many residents who live in the underserved communities, when there's time to bring major investment, when it was time to bring major big projects, only the upper class benefits. When there's a time to identify location, they mainly will look to the underserved communities. We lost a generation of Black and Latino young people in the 80s. Crack was invented under the George Washington Bridge. Today, opium is proven that it's killing people from different social, ethnic, and economic background. Here we are together because we need to be in solidarity to each other. But there's a clear thing. Unless we do more prevention, unless we look what's going on, the Chelsea Pier, the Astro Green, all those places that provide quality programs to children and young people, and we don't see Black and Latino poor people, we will continue creating a condition for many poor kids to be ending with addiction. So we need to focus also on addiction as also helping those individuals dealing with addictions.
We have room for two more, so you get one and then somebody else who wants to respond.
Councilman Rodriguez brings up a very important point. The crisis in healthcare, which has spilled over to the opioid crisis, and I do believe that these boxes do help communities, and if it's not working, we need to figure out why. Assess the data, start to go out into communities. I've called to decentralize the office of public advocates, so there's a public advocate in every city council district, so communities have somewhere to engage, have information released available to them. It's a partner with communities who may not trust government, who may not trust the law enforcement of the community. But aside from that, I really do believe that we need to pass Medicare for all. When you don't have Medicare for all, there are some communities that have had access to resources, to doctors, to healthcare that can help them get over addictions, and of course those who cannot afford to do so are left hanging. So to deal with this, we need to do two things: pass Medicare for all, and really take on, as Assemblyman Kim said, the prescription drug industry that's pushed these prescriptions down people's throats and caused a crisis.
Anybody want to do a last comment? Go ahead, Mr. Yee, and then we'll begin with our closing statements.
So I grew up in Brooklyn, and when I was growing up back in the day, there were needles and crack vials all around. There were gunshots across the street. We've come a long way from there, but ultimately, having a place to put needles is only a good thing. We need more of these drop boxes, and we need more clinics, and we need more places where people can go and exchange their needles. And why? Because we need more touch points for people to interact with the government so that the government can have an opportunity to find them and help them get out of the addiction from which they are suffering. It's so important, and that is also why programs like Civics for All and Power for Communities are so important, because it provides a proactive way for the Public Advocate's Office to be in people's community, to be engaging them. Enough with the, I'm a politician and I'm going to listen better than the last politician. We need to be proactive in our engagement of communities. It can't be something where we wait for people to come to us. We need to expend the resources to go and hear from people and help them where they are.
Thank you very much. Candidates, we've reached the part of our program where we will have you deliver closing statements. You each have 30 seconds. I'd love to give you more time, but we have a big field. We want to get everybody in. Mr. Kim, you can begin.
Thank you for hosting tonight. My name is Ron Kim. I'm running for people, to put people over corporations. We can all agree on the same problems, whether it's failing subways, affordable housing, failing schools, but the root problem that ties everything is corporate welfare. The billions of dollars that we give away that we should be reinvesting back into our people and communities. My name is Ron Kim. Vote for me on February 26th. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Ms. Konst.
My name is Nomiki Konst. I'm running as an investigative reporter, as an activist. This job is exactly those two things. Of the people on stage, there's a lot of diverse history, but I am aggressively taking on the real estate developers in this city who have really lobbied our politicians to make communities in New York unaffordable. Wages are historically low, rent is historically high, and our infrastructure is in decay. Our city is being starved of resources, and our politicians want to put the costs on you. That's unfair. As public advocate, I will not only fight for our developers to pay their share in taxes, but also to redistribute that wealth down to the communities that deserve it. NomikiKonst.com, February 26th, Pay Folks More Party.
Thank you so much, Mr. Rodriguez.
Hoy yo le pido el apoyo a todos los inmigrantes que hemos venido a Nueva York a lavar platos, a taxiar, a trabajar en factoría, que venimos de América Latina, de Asia, de Europa, de todos nuestros países. Hoy es el tiempo de demostrar que debe haber una voz de los inmigrantes que luchen por educación de calidad, por crear condiciones de oportunidades para todos los inmigrantes de esta gran nación. Podemos hacer de Nueva York un Nueva York para todos. Today I ask the support of all immigrants who are committed to take our city to a place where segregation will be over. And not the type of segregation that we have today, where opportunities are dictated by the zip code where the children are born and raised. I invite everyone to help me to build a New York City for all.
Thank you. Mr. Blake?
Born and raised in the Bronx, New York, Creston and Burnside. Went to PS 79, 118 in DeWitt Clinton High School. Son of Jamaican immigrants. My mother raised 4 boys, 40 years, worked at a factory, beat breast cancer. My daddy, 29 years, a janitor, St. Barnabas Hospital, 1199 SCIU. Went to go work for President Obama in the White House, came back to our home to focus on helping communities. I'm running for public advocate for jobs and justice for the people. We believe public advocates should be on the MTA board. We believe we have to have affordable housing. We believe we should build schools and not jails. If you believe in this vision for Bronx and all across our New York City, my name is Michael Blake. I'm running for jobs and justice for the people. Join us, BlakeForNYC.com. I'm asking for your vote on February 26th.
Jared Rich?
My name is Jared Rich. I'm born and raised in Brooklyn, New York. I'm a product of the New York City Public Schools. I have a government and politics degree from University of Maryland and a law degree from Brooklyn Law School. I'm an independent lawyer. I work for myself. I'm an outsider. I'm beholden to no one. If you're sick of politics as usual, if you think that government needs to have new blood, if you think that in order to change the government you need to have new people, then there's an alternative in this election, and his name is Jared Rich. Check me out, jaredrich.nyc. Vote for Jared Rich, February 26th. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Mr. Espinal?
Como hijo de dominicanos, yo también le pido el apoyo a todos los latinos que están mirando esto ahora. I'm running to make New York City a livable city. You know, tonight we heard a lot of truths, we heard a lot of lies, and I think that we should be focusing more about how we're going to make a New York City that's equitable for all New Yorkers. We're tired of the broken MTA. We're tired of the crumbling NYCHA apartments. We are tired of the fact that the housing costs continue to go up. I have a plan to fix all of those things, and one of them includes taxing NYCHA. I have a proven record in the City Council of passing some very important legislation that changed the lives of many New Yorkers. I want to do that as your public advocate because I believe it's time that we stop using the same old politics to deal with the same old problems and create new solutions.
Thank you very much. Mr. Yee?
New York is facing so many challenges. And for the most part, New Yorkers know what they are. They understand them. And they know where we want to be in the future. The question of this election is who has the plan of action to get us from where we are today to where we are tomorrow. Now, there's not a single idea or promise I have made in this debate which cannot be done from the public advocate's office the way it is right now. You can see them all on benjaminyee.com. I'd love your vote for public advocate on February 26th.
Thank you very much. Ms. Smalls?
Hi, I'm Dawn Smalls, and I am a mom and an attorney, and I am coming to this race with over 2 decades of experience in law, government, politics, and philanthropy. Under President Obama, I was part of the leadership team responsible for the initial implementation of the Affordable Care Act, which of course made healthcare a reality for millions of Americans. Why is that relevant? It's relevant because I have experience breaking through the bureaucracy to get results, and that's what I want to do for New York. Please check me out on dawnfornewyork.com, and I hope to get your vote on February 26th. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much. Mr. Herbert?
Since the age of 14, I've been active in my community, working very diligently with a number of community-based organizations. Moving that on forward, having suffered through homelessness, living in a shelter, well, not in a shelter, it's an abandoned building, avoiding going into shelters, we've actually found out what the reason was. It was because politicians turned their back on my family. Now, going forward, I now work and have worked for elected officials on all levels, which is city, state, and federal, for Congressman Towns, City Council Priscilla Wooten, as well as the New York State Senate. With that being said, I understand the dynamics of what the problem is. That's because the watchdog isn't watching what they're supposed to be looking at. We need to step up to ensure that we have someone that will stand there and fight against big business, fight against corruption, and make sure that the elected officials are doing their job so that we can put residents first. Tony Herbert, I'm running on the Residents First line, Herbert for NYC.com.
Thank you. And the final word of the evening for you, David Eisenbach.
I'm David Eisenbach, and as a historian, I can tell you, New York is at a historic turning point. We can keep on going down this unsustainable path where we build luxury towers and we rezone affordable neighborhoods that cause historic displacement and homelessness. We can continue to allow small business to disappear from our streets, or we can stand right now and defend our communities against the pay-to-play corruption and the big real estate giveaway. I'm not just talking about it. I've been on the streets with you.
15.
I marched in Inwood. I've testified at City Hall against the East Harlem rezoning, among others. And I've been fighting for the Small Business Job Survival Act. And we are going to pass it despite Rebney's opposition. I can defeat them in favor of small business, and I can fight for you as your public advocate. Thank you.
Well, we have come to the conclusion of our program, and I thank all the candidates. You have demonstrated the best of the democratic process, and I know on BronxNet Television we take it very seriously, and your participation is greatly appreciated. Maybe the people in the audience will give you a round of applause for joining us tonight. We do want to thank each of you. We thank our partners, the League of Women Voters and Lehman Stages, also to our friends at Manhattan Neighborhood Network for their simulcast. We urge all New Yorkers to get out and vote on Tuesday, February 26th. Good night.